A widow's arms gave out on the burning trail as her children wailed with fever, until a Choctaw tracker emerged from the red earth, carrying a mercy she thought God had forgotten. The Oklahoma sun was a brand pressed against Mary Trent's skull, searing through her bonnet, baking the thoughts in her mind until all that remained was the animal need to keep moving forward. One foot, then another, though her legs had stopped feeling like her own hours ago. The wagon trail stretched ahead like a cruel promise, shimmering in the heat, leading somewhere she could no longer remember or care about. Behind her, clutched against her chest, 5-year-old William burned with fever that had started 3 days ago as a cough and had grown into something that rattled his small lungs with every breath. His face was flushed crimson, his eyes glassy and unfocused, his lips cracked and bleeding. He whimpered against her shoulder, the sound barely human, and each cry drove a spike deeper into Mary's heart. Beside her, struggling to keep pace, 9-year-old Rose stumbled through the red dust, her dress torn and filthy, her dark hair matted with sweat and grime. The girl's face was pale beneath the dirt, her own forehead warm to the touch, though not yet burning like her brother's. Rose had stopped asking questions 2 days ago. Stopped asking when Papa was coming back, stopped asking why they had to leave the wagon, stopped asking if they would die out here. Now she just walked, her small hand gripping Mary's skirt like an anchor to the living world. Mary's arms screamed with the weight of William's body, 20 pounds that might as well have been 200. Her muscles had long since passed through pain into numbness, and now even the numbness was fading, replaced by a terrible weakness that spread through her shoulders, down her spine, into her very bones. Each step required a negotiation with her body, a desperate plea for just one more. Just one more, just one more. The year was 1867, 2 years after the war that had torn the nation apart and left widows scattered across the frontier like seeds on barren ground. Mary's husband Thomas had not died in battle but 3 months after it ended, when cholera swept through their settlement in Arkansas and took half the town with it. The doctor, if you could call him that, had done nothing but watch and collect his fees from those who could still pay. Thomas had lingered for 6 days, his body wringing itself dry from the inside out, and on the 7th day he was gone. Mary had sold everything they owned to pay for the burial and the debts Thomas had left behind. The farm went to the bank, the livestock to neighbors who looked at her with pity that felt like acid on her skin. She had packed what remained into a single wagon, gathered her children, and joined a group heading west to Indian Territory, where land was cheap and hope was cheaper. They promised safety in numbers, promised to look after the widow and her little ones. But promises were wind, and wind changes direction without warning. The group had fractured 3 weeks into the journey, when disputes over route and rations turned to shouting matches and then to fists. Families split off in different directions, some turning back east, others pushing north. Mary had stayed with a smaller group heading southwest, but even that group had dwindled as sickness and accident picked them off one by one. Then came the night when the Hendersons' wagon caught fire. No one knew how, and in the chaos of trying to save their goods, Mary's own wagon had been damaged beyond repair, the axle cracked clean through. The Hendersons had taken what they could carry and kept moving, promising to send help from the next settlement. The Caldwells had offered Mary and the children space in their wagon, but when William's fever started, when his coughing kept them awake through the night, Mrs. Caldwell had whispered to her husband loud enough for Mary to hear that she would not risk her own children catching whatever plague the boy carried. By morning the Caldwells were gone, their wagon tracks heading north, while Mary stood alone beside her broken wagon with 2 children and supplies she could not carry. And that was 4 days ago. 4 days of walking with William in her arms and Rose beside her, following the wagon ruts southwest because there was nowhere else to go. 4 days of watching her water supply dwindle to nothing, of rationing the last strips of dried meat, of feeling William's fever climb higher while her own strength drained away like water through cupped hands. The landscape around them was unforgiving. a vast expanse of red earth and scrub grass, dotted with twisted trees that offered no shade worth mentioning. The sun ruled this land with absolute authority, and Mary felt its judgment in every scorching ray. Buzzards circled overhead, patient as death itself, and Mary had stopped throwing rocks at them yesterday when she realized she was wasting energy she could not afford to lose. Rose stumbled, her knee hitting the ground hard enough to draw blood through her torn stockings. She did not cry out, just pushed herself back up with trembling arms and kept walking. The girl's resilience broke Mary's heart more thoroughly than tears ever could. "Mama," Rose whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Mama, I can see something." "Look." Mary lifted her head, squinting against the glare. At first, she saw nothing but more endless trail, more red earth bleeding into white sky. Then she saw it, a dark shape in the distance, something vertical where everything else was horizontal. A tree, perhaps, or a rock formation, or perhaps another hallucination, like the lake she had seen yesterday that vanished as they approached, leaving only more dust and disappointment. "We will try for it," Mary said, though her voice sounded like a stranger's, cracked and thin. "Just a little further, my darling. Just a little further." But her body had other plans. The weakness in her arms had become a trembling she could no longer control. William's weight shifted, and Mary tried to adjust her grip, tried to pull him higher against her chest, but her muscles simply stopped obeying. Her arms opened of their own accord, nerveless and useless, and William began to slide. "No," Mary gasped, trying to catch him, but her knees were already buckling, her legs giving out beneath her. She fell forward, twisting desperately to take the impact herself, to keep William from hitting the ground. They crashed together into the red dust, Mary's shoulder taking the worst of it, pain shooting through her collarbone like lightning. William rolled from her arms, coughing weakly, and Mary could not reach for him because her arms would not move, would not obey, would not do anything but lie useless in the dirt. "Mama!" Rose screamed, dropping beside them, her small hands grabbing at Mary's shoulders, shaking her. "Mama, get up! Please get up, Mama!" Mary tried. She tried with everything she had left, but her body had finally mutinied completely. Her arms lay in the dust like dead things, her legs sprawled at angles that felt wrong, her chest heaving with breaths that brought no relief. Tears carved channels through the dust on her face as she looked at her children, at Rose's terrified eyes and William's fevered stillness, and the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. This was where they would die. Not in a bed surrounded by loved ones, not with dignity or grace, but here in the dirt like animals, alone and forgotten, their bones to be scattered by coyotes and buried by time. This was the end of the Trent family, this nameless spot on a nameless trail, in a land that cared nothing for their struggles or their dreams. "I am sorry," Mary sobbed, the words tearing from her throat like flesh from bone. "Rose, my darling, I am so sorry. My arms, they cannot hold you any longer. I'm too weak. I'm too weak." Rose collapsed against her mother's side, her thin body shaking with sobs that she had held back for days, for weeks, perhaps for months. William lay between them, his breathing shallow and rapid, his small chest rising and falling with a rhythm that sounded wrong. Sounded like an ending. Mary closed her eyes, her lips moving in a prayer she had said so many times it had lost all meaning. But she said it anyway because what else was there? "Lord, have mercy on us. Christ, have mercy on us. Lord, have mercy." The sun beat down indifferent. The buzzards circled, patient, and then Mary heard something that made her eyes snap open. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, moving through the brush beside the trail. Not the random wandering of an animal, but the purposeful stride of something, someone, approaching with intention. Mary's heart leapt with hope and terror in equal measure, because out here, in this lawless territory, a stranger could be salvation or something far worse. A shadow fell across them, blocking the murderous sun. Mary tilted her head back, squinting up through the glare and her own tears, and saw a figure standing above them. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a strange combination of buckskin and cloth that marked him as neither fully white nor fully native in the way settlements defined such things. His face was weathered and strong, his long black hair pulled back and tied with leather cord. his dark eyes studying them with an intensity that felt like being read. Like every secret and failure of Mary's life was being catalogued and judged. He carried no rifle, which was unusual for this territory, but a bow was slung across his back, and a hunting knife hung at his belt alongside various pouches and bags that suggested a man who knew how to survive in this harsh land. His clothing was dust-covered but well-maintained, his moccasins showing the wear of long miles but careful repair. For a long moment, he simply stood there, silent and still, while Mary's mind raced through calculations of threat and opportunity. Rose had gone rigid with fear, pressing closer to her mother while William remained oblivious in his fever. Then the stranger spoke, his voice low and measured, carrying an accent Mary could not quite place. "You are far from any settlement." It was not a question, but a statement of fact, and Mary found herself nodding, her throat too tight for words. The stranger's eyes moved over them, assessing. He saw the way Mary's arms lay useless in the dust, saw Rose's trembling exhaustion, saw William's fevered stillness, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition, as if he had seen this scene before and knew how it ended. "The boy is sick," he said, and again it was not a question. "Fever," Mary managed to croak. "3 days now. It gets worse. I have nothing left to give him. No medicine, no water, nothing." The stranger knelt, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of a body in perfect harmony with itself. He reached toward William, and Rose made a small sound of protest, but Mary, with an instinct she could not explain, whispered, "Let him." The stranger's hand pressed against William's forehead, then his neck, then opened the boy's mouth to examine his throat. His fingers were gentle but sure, the touch of someone who had done this many times before. After a moment he sat back on his heels, his expression grave. "Lung fever," he said. "Without medicine, without rest, he will die before nightfall." The words should have been devastating, but Mary had already known them in her heart, had already accepted them. What broke her was the lack of judgment in the stranger's voice, no condemnation of her failures as a mother, just a simple statement of fact. "I know," Mary whispered. "I know, and I can do nothing. My arms, they will not hold him anymore. I cannot carry him. I cannot save them. I cannot." Her voice broke completely, dissolving into sobs that shook her entire body. Rose was crying too, her face buried against Mary's shoulder, and William coughed weakly, lost in his fever dreams. The stranger watched them for a moment longer. Then he did something Mary did not expect. He removed the leather pouches from his belt and set them aside. He shrugged the bow from his shoulder and laid it carefully on the ground. Then he bent down and lifted William into his arms with the same easy strength he might use to lift a blanket, cradling the boy against his chest as if the child's weight was nothing at all. "What are you doing?" Mary gasped. The stranger's dark eyes met hers, and in them, Mary saw something she had not seen in any face since Thomas died. She saw genuine care, not pity or duty or obligation, but real human care for 3 strangers dying in the dust. "I am Holy Topa," he said simply. "I am Choctaw, and I will not leave you here to die." Mary's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories about the Choctaw, about the people who had been forced to walk the Trail of Tears decades ago, driven from their ancestral lands to this territory by men with guns and papers that claimed divine authority. She had heard they were dangerous, savage, that they killed white settlers and took children for slaves. But she had also heard other stories, whispered by those who knew better. Stories of Choctaw families sharing food with starving travelers, of Choctaw medicine men healing the sick when white doctors turned them away for lack of payment, of a people who had suffered greatly and yet had not let that suffering make them cruel. Looking into Holy Topa's eyes, Mary knew which stories were true. "My daughter," Mary whispered, gesturing weakly toward Rose with arms that still would not obey her. "I cannot walk. I cannot carry her. Please, if you can save only one. Take the boy, he is youngest. He has more life ahead." Holy Topa's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that looked like pain, like old grief awakened. "I will take all three," he said, and his voice carried absolute certainty. "Can the girl walk a little further?" Rose lifted her tear-stained face, her eyes wide. "Yes," she said, her voice small but steady. "Yes, I can walk. I'm strong." "Good," Hollytopper said with a small nod of approval. Then he looked back at Mary. "And you, can you stand if I help you?" Mary wanted to say yes, wanted to be strong like her daughter, but honesty forced the truth from her lips. "I do not know. My arms, they are not working. My legs feel like water." Hollytopper studied her for a moment, then made a decision. He adjusted William in his arms so the boy was settled more securely against his chest. Then he looked at Rose. "Come here, little one." Rose hesitated, glancing at her mother. "Go on," Mary urged. "It is all right." Rose stood on shaking legs and moved to Hollytopper's side. He guided her to position herself slightly behind him, then spoke in a tone that was gentle but commanding. "Hold on to my belt. Do not let go no matter what. Can you do this?" "Yes, sir," Rose said, her small hands gripping the leather belt at his waist. Then Hollytopper did something that seemed impossible. Still holding William securely with one arm, he reached down with his free hand, grasped Mary's arm, and hauled her to her feet as if she weighed no more than a child. Mary's legs wobbled, threatening to give out again, but Hollytopper pulled her arm across his shoulders, taking her weight against his side while still cradling William and still allowing Rose to hold his belt. "How?" Mary started to ask, but Hollytopper was already moving, his stride steady and sure, carrying William, supporting Mary, guiding Rose, all three of them at once, moving with a strength that seemed beyond human. "My village is 2 miles southwest," he said, his breathing still even despite the weight he carried. "My wife is a healer. She will know what to do for the boy. But we must move quickly. The fever is high and time is against us." Mary's mind reeled. 2 miles, she could not have walked 2 more feet on her own. But here was this stranger, this Choctaw man named Hollytopper, carrying her family as if they were his own, moving with purpose across land that had seemed designed to kill them. Why? Mary whispered as they walked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why are you helping us? You do not know us. We are nothing to you." Hollytopper was quiet for several steps, and Mary thought perhaps he would not answer. Then he spoke, his voice carrying a weight that suggested old pain, old loss. "Many years ago, when I was young, my people walked through lands not our own, driven from the home of our fathers by soldiers with guns and laws made of paper. We walked through winter cold and summer heat, and many died on that trail, the old ones and the young ones. They died because they could not walk further, because their bodies gave out, because there was no mercy for the weak." He paused, adjusting his grip on William as the boy coughed weakly. "I watched my mother fall on that trail, watched her arms give out trying to carry my baby sister, watched soldiers pass by without stopping, watched other travelers look away. She died there in the dirt, and my sister died 3 days later." Mary's throat tightened with grief, not just for her own situation, but for this man's terrible loss. "I made a promise that day," Hollytopper continued, his voice steady despite the pain in his words. "I promised that if I ever saw another mother fall, if I ever saw children suffering as we suffered, I would not look away. I would not pass by. I would carry them if I had to carry them on my back until my own body gave out. Because no one should die alone in the dust while others watch." Tears streamed down Mary's face, but they were different tears now, not despair, but something else, something that felt almost like hope, rekindled from cold ashes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Hollytopper said nothing more, just kept walking with that same steady pace, his strength seemingly endless, his purpose unshakable. Rose walked beside him, her hand gripping his belt like a lifeline, her small face set with determination. William breathed against Hollytopper's chest, each breath still wrong but at least still coming. And Mary, supported by this stranger's arm, felt something shift in her heart, some understanding that perhaps God had not forgotten them after all, that perhaps mercy still existed in this harsh world, that perhaps they would live to see another sunrise. The dark shape in the distance resolved itself as they drew closer. Not a single tree or rock, but a cluster of structures. Low buildings made of wood and earth, smoke rising from several chimneys. A village, small but real, proof of human life in this wilderness. "Almost there," Hollytopper said, and for the first time Mary heard a note of strain in his voice, the first sign that even his remarkable strength had limits. "Hold on just a little longer." Mary held on because what else could she do? Because this man had given her something she thought was lost forever. He had given her children a chance to live, and she would not waste that gift by giving up now. They walked on toward the village. 4 souls bound together by circumstance and choice, by suffering and mercy, by the simple human truth that sometimes salvation comes not from where we expect, but from those we have been taught to fear. And as they entered the village, as Choctaw people emerged from their homes to help, to take William from Hollytopper's arms, to support Mary, to comfort Rose, Mary understood that she had been saved not just from death, but from something worse. She had been saved from dying in a world where compassion was dead, because here, in this place, among these people, compassion still lived, and that made all the difference. The village emerged from the red earth like something born of the land itself. Structures that seemed to grow rather than be built, crafted from timber and clay and grass, woven so tightly it could turn rain. Smoke rose from cooking fires, carrying the scent of cornmeal and herbs Mary did not recognize. Children stopped their play to stare at the newcomers, their dark eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. Women looked up from their work, hands stilling on grinding stones and weaving frames, their expressions shifting from surprise to something Mary could not quite read. Concern, perhaps, or calculation, Hollytopper called out in a language Mary had never heard. Words that rolled and clicked in ways English never did. Sounds that seemed to carry meaning in their very rhythm. An older woman emerged from the largest structure, her hair silver as moonlight, her face lined with the kind of wisdom that comes only from surviving what should have killed you. She wore a dress of deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork, and around her neck hung various pouches and bundles that marked her as someone of importance. The old woman's eyes went immediately to William in Hollytopper's arms, and whatever she saw there made her face harden with purpose. She barked orders in that flowing language, and suddenly the village transformed from curious observers to coordinated action. 2 younger women rushed forward to take William from Hollytopper, their hands gentle but efficient as they carried the fevered boy toward one of the structures. Another woman came to support Mary, easing her weight from Hollytopper's shoulder, speaking soft words in broken English. "Come, you rest now. Children safe here. We help." Mary wanted to protest, wanted to keep her children in sight, but her body made the decision for her. Legs finally giving out completely, now that survival was no longer the only thing keeping her upright. The woman caught her, surprisingly strong despite her small frame, and half-carried Mary toward a different structure while calling for assistance. "Rose!" Mary gasped, twisting to see her daughter, panic rising in her chest despite the kindness surrounding them. "Where is Rose?" "And I'm here, Mama." Rose's voice came from behind, still holding tight to Hollytopper's belt as he walked beside Mary. "I'm right here. I will not leave you." They were brought to a dwelling that was dim and cool inside, the walls thick enough to keep out the murderous heat. Woven mats covered the floor, and the air smelled of sage and cedar and something else. Something medicinal that reminded Mary of the herbs her own grandmother had grown in Ireland before the famine drove them across the ocean. The women eased Mary down onto a pile of soft hides, and she collapsed into them with a groan of relief so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Hollytopper knelt beside her, his face still calm, but his eyes showing the first signs of exhaustion from carrying 3 people across 2 miles of harsh terrain. "My mother will tend to the boy," he said, gesturing toward the old woman who had disappeared into another dwelling with William. "She is called Aholichta, she who knows the ways of healing plants and fever spirits. If anyone can save your son, it is her." "Thank you," Mary whispered, the words feeling inadequate, too small to contain the gratitude that threatened to overwhelm her. "Thank you for our lives." Holitopa shook his head slightly. "Thank me when the boy wakes with clear eyes and steady breath. Until then, we fight." He stood to leave, but Rose suddenly released his belt and grabbed his hand instead, her small fingers wrapping around his larger ones. "Please do not let my brother die," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "Please, he is all I have left of Papa. Mama needs him. I need him." Something shifted in Holitopa's expression, some ancient pain flickering across his features before being locked away again behind that mask of calm. He knelt so he was eye level with Rose, and when he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness Mary had not yet heard from him. "I will tell you what my father told me when my sister was sick and I was afraid," he said. "Fear is like a stone you carry in your chest. It is heavy and it hurts, but sometimes you must set the stone down and trust others to carry it for a while. Can you do that? Can you set down your fear and let my mother carry it?" Rose stared at him for a long moment, tears streaming down her dirty face, then slowly she nodded. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "I will try. That's all anyone can do," Holitopa said. He placed his other hand over hers, a gesture of promise. "Now rest with your mother. Let us do our work." He stood and left, his footsteps silent despite his size, and Rose crawled to Mary's side, pressing close. Mary wrapped her arms around her daughter, grateful that feeling had returned to her limbs enough to hold the girl. And together they lay in the cool darkness, while the village hummed with activity around them. Time moved strangely in that place, stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. Women came and went, bringing water that tasted of minerals and earth, bringing a thick soup made from corn and beans and meat Mary did not recognize, but ate anyway because her body demanded fuel. They brought cool cloths for Mary's forehead, brought a clean dress to replace Rose's torn and filthy one, brought a salve for the cuts on both their feet that stung like fire but took away the pain of infection. Through it all, Mary listened for sounds from the dwelling where William had been taken, straining her ears for cries of pain, or worse, for silence. But the walls were thick, and the village was alive with its own sounds. Children laughing, women talking, men returning from whatever work occupied their days. The crackle of fires and the distant call of birds. Normal sounds? Life sounds, sounds that felt impossible after days of hearing nothing but wind and buzzards and her own labored breathing. As the light shifted from afternoon to evening, a young woman entered their dwelling carrying a small oil lamp. She was perhaps 20, with long black hair braided down her back and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor. She set the lamp down and studied Mary and Rose with open curiosity before speaking in careful, deliberate English. "I am Taloa. I learn your language from the missionary who came 3 winters past," she said, her accent thick but her words clear. "Holitopa, he is my uncle. He asked me to come, to speak with you, to tell you what happens with your son." Mary sat up so fast her head spun, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Is he as William?" "He lives," Taloa said quickly, holding up a hand. "He lives, but the fever, it is very strong. Aholita, she makes medicine from the roots and leaves. She makes steam for him to breathe. She sings the healing songs. But," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "the spirit that makes the sickness, it does not want to leave. It fights to stay. We must fight harder." Rose gripped Mary's hand so tightly it hurt. "Can we see him?" the girl asked, her voice small and desperate. "Please, I need to see him." Taloa's expression softened. "Soon, yes. But now, Aholita needs silence and peace to do her work. The boy, he is not awake. He would not know you are there. Better you rest, make yourselves strong. So when he wakes, he sees his mother and sister with bright eyes and steady hands, yes?" It was not what Mary wanted to hear, but she recognized the wisdom in it. She nodded slowly, swallowing back the protests that wanted to pour from her throat. Taloa smiled, a genuine expression of warmth. "Good. You are wise to trust. Now I have questions, if you are strong enough to answer. We must know your story, to understand how to help you." And so Mary told it, haltingly at first, then with growing ease as Taloa listened without judgment, without interruption, her face showing only compassion and interest. Mary told of Thomas's death, of the failed journey west, of the wagon breaking and being abandoned, of the 4 days walking through hell with dying children and failing strength. Rose added details Mary had forgotten or not known, speaking of her own fear, of watching her mother grow weaker, of trying to be brave when all she wanted was to lie down and never get up. When the story was finished, Taloa sat in silence for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she said something that surprised Mary. "You are stronger than you know," Taloa said. "To walk 4 days with a sick child in your arms, with no water, no food, no rest, this is not weakness. This is the strength of the mother bear who will die before she lets harm come to her cubs. Holitopa saw this strength in you. That is why he brought you here." "I collapsed," Mary said bitterly. "My arms gave out. I failed them." "No," Taloa said firmly. "Your body reached its limit. This is not failure. This is being human. Failure is giving up when you still have strength. You did not give up. You fought until there was nothing left to fight with, and then, when the Spirit sent help, you accepted it. That is wisdom, not weakness." Mary felt something crack open in her chest, some tight knot of shame and guilt that had been choking her since she fell in the dust. Tears came again, but different tears, cleansing rather than despairing. Rose pressed closer to her mother. "Is that true?" the girl asked Taloa. "Is Mama really strong? She always seems so tired, so sad. I thought maybe she was weak like the other ladies said." Taloa's eyes flashed with anger at whatever memory Rose's words triggered. "The other ladies, the ones who left you, they are the weak ones. They have strength in their bodies, but weakness in their hearts. True strength is not about muscles or endurance. It is about what you do when everything is against you, when the easy choice is to think only of yourself. Your mama chose to keep fighting for you, even when her body was breaking. That is the strongest thing a person can do." Rose looked at Mary with new eyes, with wonder and pride mixed with the love that had always been there. "Mama is strong," she repeated, as if testing the words, finding them true. "Yes," Taloa said. "And you are strong too, little one. You walked beside your mother when you could have ridden in her arms. You did not complain, did not slow her down. You protected your family by being brave. That is also strength." Rose's face crumpled, all the fear and exhaustion and grief she had been holding back for days, finally breaking free. She sobbed against Mary's shoulder, her small body shaking with the force of emotions too large for one child to contain. Mary held her, rocking gently, whispering the same words her own mother had whispered to her a lifetime ago in a different land. Words of comfort in a language Rose did not understand, but felt in her bones. Taloa watched them with eyes that held their own memories of loss and survival. After a time, when Rose's sobs had quieted to hiccups, she spoke again. "There is something else you should know," she said carefully. "Something about why Holitopa helped you. Why he brings strangers to our village when many here still do not trust the white people who took our lands and sent us on the long walk of death." Mary lifted her head, waiting, sensing that what came next was important. "Holitopa lost more than his mother and sister on the trail," Taloa continued. "He lost his wife also and his 2 sons. The younger boy, he was sick with fever, like your William. Holitopa tried to carry him, tried to keep moving, but the soldiers would not let them stop, would not let them rest. The boy died in his father's arms while they walked, and there was nothing Holitopa could do but keep moving or be shot." Mary's hand flew to her mouth, horror and grief washing over her in equal measure. "Oh God," she whispered. "His wife, she died 3 days later from the grief and the cold," Taloa went on, her voice steady but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "His older son died the week after we reached this territory, from sickness in his lungs brought on by the journey. In 1 month, Holitopa lost everything that mattered to him. He wanted to die also, wanted to walk into the wilderness and not return. But he did not, Mary said, understanding dawning. No, Taloa confirmed. He chose to live. He chose to become a healer and a tracker, to learn the ways of medicine from his mother, to use his strength to help others. He made a promise to the spirits of his family that he would never let another mother watch her child die if he had the power to prevent it. That promise, it has driven him for 20 years. He has saved many people, white and native both, because to him, a mother's grief is the same in any language. The weight of this knowledge settled over Mary like a heavy blanket, warm and suffocating at once. This man who had saved them, who had carried them when they could not walk, who even now was probably standing vigil over William. He had suffered losses that made Mary's own pale in comparison, and yet he had not let that suffering make him cruel or cold. Instead, he had transformed it into purpose, into compassion, into action. "I do not know how to repay such a debt," Mary said quietly. Taloa shook her head. He does not want repayment. He wants only to break the cycle of death and suffering. Every person he saves, it is like healing a small part of the wound in his own heart. Your gratitude means less to him than your son's recovery. As if summoned by the words, footsteps approached the dwelling, and Daholita appeared in the doorway, her silver hair catching the lamplight, her face exhausted but not defeated. She spoke in Choctaw, the words flowing like water over stones, and Taloa translated, "The fever breaks," she said, and Mary's heart leaped so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. The boy sleeps now, true sleep, not the fever sleep. He will wake in the morning, weak but alive. The medicine works. The spirits show mercy. Mary tried to stand to go to William, but her legs still would not fully support her weight. Rose was faster, scrambling up and toward the door before anyone could stop her. "Please," the girl begged, looking between Aholita and Taloa. "Please let me see him. I will be quiet. I will not wake him. I just need to see." Aholita studied Rose for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She held out her hand, and Rose took it, letting the old healer lead her out into the village night. Mary watched them go, her heart following even though her body could not. Taloa moved to sit beside Mary, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Your daughter, she has the heart of a warrior. She will be a strong woman one day." "She already is," Mary whispered. Pride and love swelling in her chest until she could barely breathe around it. They sat in silence for a time, listening to the sounds of the village settling for the night. The fires banking, the voices quieting, the world growing still. Mary felt something she had not felt in months, perhaps years. She felt safe, truly and completely safe, surrounded by people who had every reason to hate those who looked like her, but had chosen compassion instead. "Why do you help us?" Mary asked suddenly, the question that had been burning in her mind, finally forcing its way out. "After everything your people have suffered at the hands of mine, why show us kindness? Why not leave us in the dust as we left you?" Taloa was quiet for a long time, her face thoughtful in the lamplight. When she finally spoke, her words carried a weight that suggested careful consideration. "Because," she said slowly, "if we become like those who hurt us, if we let their cruelty make us cruel, then they have won. They have not just taken our land, they have taken our souls, our humanity. We refuse to give them that victory. We choose to remember who we are, who we have always been, a people who believe that all life is sacred, that children are precious gifts, that suffering should be eased wherever it is found. This is not weakness, it is the strongest resistance we can offer. To remain human when they tried to make us less than human." The words hit Mary like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they illuminated something she had never quite understood. The difference between surviving and living, between enduring and thriving, between being broken by trauma and being shaped by it into something stronger and more beautiful than before. "I am sorry," Mary said, the words inadequate but necessary. "I am sorry for what my people did to yours. I'm sorry for the trail of tears and the broken promises and the stolen land. I'm sorry that my survival depends on your generosity when it should be the other way around. I'm sorry. Taloa squeezed her shoulder gently. Your sorrow is heard and honored. But you are not responsible for the actions of those who came before you, only for your own actions now. You chose to keep your children alive, even when it cost you everything. You chose to accept help from those you were taught to fear. You choose now to see us as human, as equal, as worthy of respect. These choices matter. They change the world, one person at a time. Rose returned then, her face peaceful for the first time in days, Aholita guiding her back with a gentle hand. The old woman spoke in Choctaw, and Taloa translated, "She says the boy sleeps well. His breathing is strong. His color is better. She says you may see him in the morning when you are rested and he is ready to open his eyes. She says you must trust and sleep now. Let the healing happen in the darkness where such things grow best." Mary nodded, tears streaming down her face. But for once, they were tears of relief rather than despair. Rose crawled back to her side, and Mary held her daughter close, feeling the girl's heartbeat against her own, steady and strong and alive. Taloa stood to leave, taking the lamp with her, but paused at the doorway. "One more thing," she said. "Tomorrow when you are stronger, Holitopa wishes to speak with you. He has questions about your plans, about where you go from here. But tonight rest. Tomorrow comes soon enough." And then she was gone, and Mary and Rose were alone in the darkness, wrapped in soft hides in a village of strangers who had shown them more kindness than their own people had, listening to the night sounds of a place that felt impossibly like safety. "Mama," Rose whispered into the darkness. "Are we going to be all right?" "Ah." Mary thought about lying, about offering false comfort, but something in the events of this day had stripped away her capacity for dishonesty. "I do not know," she said honestly. "But I know we are alive, and William will live, and that is more than I dared hope for when the sun rose this morning. So yes, my darling, I think we might be all right. I think we might even be more than all right." Rose sighed, a sound of contentment that seemed impossible given everything they had endured. "I like it here," she said sleepily. "It feels like home." Mary's throat tightened with emotion she could not name. Home? They had not had a home since Thomas died. Just a series of temporary shelters and broken promises, but here, in this village of people who owed them nothing and had given them everything, Rose felt at home. Perhaps there was wisdom in the innocent observation of children. Perhaps home was not a place but a feeling, not walls and roofs, but kindness and safety, and the knowledge that you mattered to someone, that your life had value, that your struggles were seen and your suffering was acknowledged. If that was true, then yes, perhaps they had found home at last. Mary closed her eyes, her arms around her daughter, her son alive in the care of healers who knew their craft. Her body finally allowed to rest after days of pushing past every limit, and for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than grief and fear. She felt gratitude and hope, and the beginnings of something that might one day grow into peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new decisions about a future she could not yet imagine. But tonight they were safe. They were cared for, they were home, and that was enough. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of cornbread baking over open fires, and Mary woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the absence of fear. For 4 days, she had woken to dread, to the knowledge that each sunrise might be their last. But today the world felt different, softer somehow, as if the sharp edges had been dulled by kindness. Rose still slept beside her, one small hand curled against her chest, her face peaceful in a way it had not been since before Thomas died. Mary studied her daughter in the dim light, filtering through the dwelling's entrance, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the dark lashes against pale skin, the slight part of her lips as she breathed. This child who had walked through hell without complaint, who had been braver than any adult Mary had known, deserved a future that held more than suffering. Movement outside caught Mary's attention, voices speaking in Choctaw, the rhythm of a village waking to another day of survival and community. She tried to sit up, and was surprised to find that her arms obeyed, that strength had returned to muscles that had failed her so completely yesterday. Her body ached in 1,000 places, but it was the ache of healing rather than breaking, and she was grateful for it. A shadow fell across the entrance, and Taloa appeared carrying a wooden bowl that steamed in the cool morning air. She smiled when she saw Mary awake, her young face bright with the kind of optimism that had not yet been crushed by too many losses. "Good morning," Taloa said softly, mindful of Rose's sleeping form. "Aholita sends this tea made from willow bark and other things to help with the pain in your body. She says you will hurt today, from the walking, from the carrying, from the falling. This will help." Mary accepted the bowl with trembling hands, inhaling the bitter-sweet scent that rose from the dark liquid within. She sipped carefully, expecting something unpleasant, but the taste was surprisingly mild, earthy and warm, with a hint of sweetness that suggested honey or maple. The heat spread through her chest and down into her limbs, bringing a comfort that went beyond the physical. "Thank you," Mary whispered, "and thank Aholita for me. For everything, for William, for this, for not turning us away when you had every right to." Taloa settled herself cross-legged near the entrance, her posture relaxed but alert. "William wakes 1 hour ago," she said, and Mary's heart leaped. "He asks for water, drinks slowly, keeps it down. Good signs, very good signs. Aholita says he is not yet strong, but the worst danger has passed. The fever spirit has moved on to find another host." Relief washed over Mary so powerfully that she had to set the bowl down before she dropped it, her hands shaking with emotion rather than weakness. "Can I see him?" "Please, I need to see him with my own eyes, to know he truly lives." "Soon," Taloa promised. "Aholita tends to him now, gives him broth to strengthen his blood, checks his breathing and his color. When she is finished, you may go to him. But first," she paused, her expression growing more serious, "Holitopa wishes to speak with you. There are things that must be discussed, decisions that must be made. Are you strong enough for this conversation?" Mary's stomach tightened with apprehension, but she nodded. She had known this moment would come, known that kindness always had limits, that eventually questions would be asked about payment, about plans, about what came next. She straightened her shoulders, preparing herself for whatever demands might follow. "I will wake Rose," Mary said, but Taloa shook her head. "Let the child sleep. This talk is for mothers and those who carry responsibility. The young one has earned her rest." There was wisdom in that, and Mary did not argue. She finished the tea, feeling its warmth settle deep in her bones, then stood with careful movements, testing her body's willingness to obey. Everything hurt, as Aholita had predicted, but it was a manageable pain, the kind that reminded you that you were alive rather than threatening to end that life. Taloa led her out into the village, and Mary saw it properly for the first time, in daylight. Perhaps 20 dwellings arranged in a loose circle around a central area where several fires burned, each tended by women preparing the morning meal. Children ran between the structures, their laughter high and clear, while men worked at various tasks, repairing tools, tending to horses in a corral Mary had not noticed in yesterday's chaos, preparing for what she assumed was a hunting expedition. The village was small but clearly well established, and Mary realized with a shock that this was not some temporary camp, but a permanent settlement, a community that had rebuilt itself after being torn from its ancestral home and forced to march across a continent. The resilience required for such rebuilding was staggering, and Mary felt a new depth of respect for these people who had turned exile into existence. Holitopa stood near one of the fires, speaking with 2 other men, his posture relaxed but commanding. He saw Mary and Taloa approaching and excused himself, crossing the distance with that same fluid grace she remembered from yesterday. In the morning light she could see him more clearly, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun, the silver threading through his black hair, the scars on his hands and arms that told stories of a life lived close to danger. "You are recovered," he said, and it was a statement rather than a question. His dark eyes assessing her with the careful attention of someone who knew how to read the subtle signs of health and illness. "Thanks to you and your mother," Mary replied. "I do not have words large enough to contain my gratitude, Holitopa. You saved my children when you could have walked past. That is a debt I can never repay." Holitopa's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, discomfort perhaps, or disagreement. "I did what anyone with a heart would do," he said simply. "But gratitude alone will not feed your children or protect them from what comes next. We must speak plainly about practical matters, about the reality of your situation." Mary's chest tightened, but she nodded. "I understand. What do you need from me?" Holitopa gestured toward a fallen log near the fire, inviting her to sit. Taloa settled beside them, ready to translate if needed, though Holitopa's English was clear enough. When they were seated, he fixed Mary with a steady gaze that seemed to see past her words into her very thoughts. "Tell me true," he said. "What was your plan? Before the wagon broke, before the sickness came, where were you going and why?" Mary swallowed hard, organizing thoughts that had become scattered by crisis and fear. "West," she said finally. "To the Oklahoma Territory, to claim land under the Homestead Act. My husband died of cholera in Arkansas, left me with debts and 2 children and nothing else. I heard there was free land for those willing to work it, a chance to build something new. I thought if I could just get there, if I could just claim a piece of land and build a cabin, we could survive. We could have a future." Holitopa listened without interruption, his face impassive. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and Mary felt dread building in her stomach, certain that he was about to tell her how foolish she had been, how impossible her dream was. But when he spoke, his words surprised her. "The land you seek, the land they promised to white settlers, it was taken from my people," he said, his voice even but carrying an edge of something harder underneath. "The government says it is free land, unclaimed, wilderness waiting to be tamed. But it is not unclaimed. It is stolen. Every acre they give to settlers is an acre taken from tribes who lived there for generations, who had treaties that promised them safety, promises made by men who knew they were lying even as the words left their mouths." Mary's face burned with shame, though she had known this truth on some level, had chosen not to think too deeply about where the free land came from or who had been displaced to make it available. "I did not know what else to do," she said quietly. "I had no money, no family, no options. The land office said it was legal, said it was ours for the taking if we could prove we would farm it. I am sorry, Holitopa. I am sorry for being part of this, for needing something that belongs to your people, but I did not know how else to save my children." Holitopa studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you. You are not the architects of this injustice, only another victim of it. The same men who take land from the Choctaw also take livelihood from Irish widows, force everyone to scramble for survival while they grow rich on our suffering. You and I, we are not enemies. We are both being crushed by the same boot, just on different parts of our bodies." The words struck Mary as profound, a truth she had never quite articulated but had felt in her bones. She and Holitopa were not so different, both trying to protect those they loved in a world designed to destroy them, both making impossible choices, because all the easy choices had been stolen away. "So, what do I do?" Mary asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "I cannot go back. There is nothing to go back to. But I cannot claim land that is not mine to take, not after you have shown me such kindness. I will not repay your mercy by stealing from your people." Something shifted in Holitopa's expression, a softening that suggested approval, perhaps even respect. "That is the question, yes. What do you do? And that is what I wish to discuss with you, because there may be another way, a path that does not require you to choose between your survival and your conscience." Mary leaned forward, hope kindling in her chest despite her best efforts to suppress it. What path? Holitopa glanced at Taloa, who nodded encouragingly, then turned back to Mary. This village, we are small, but we are growing. Families return from the cities, from the missions, from the places they scattered to after the long walk. They come back to find their people, to rebuild what was broken. We need many things, skills and knowledge, and hands willing to work. We need farmers who understand crops. We need teachers who can help our children learn to read English so they are not cheated in the white man's courts. We need healers who know medicines different from our own. He paused, letting her absorb his words before continuing. You could stay here, work with us, learn from us, teach us what you know. Your children would be safe, fed, educated. You would have a home, not land that belongs to you alone, but a place within a community, belonging that runs deeper than ownership. In return, you would work as we all work, for the good of everyone rather than just yourself. Is this something you could accept, or do you need the promise of private property to feel secure? The question was asked without judgment, but Mary felt the weight of it nonetheless, the challenge to examine her own values and assumptions. She thought about the farm she and Thomas had owned in Arkansas, the way it had isolated them, made them vulnerable, left her with nothing when he died because everything was tied to land that could be taken by those with more power. She thought about the wagon train, the way people had turned on each other when resources grew scarce, the way community had fractured because everyone was focused on their own survival rather than collective well-being. And she thought about this village, small and poor by white standards, but rich in something more valuable: mutual care, shared responsibility, the knowledge that you would not be abandoned when crisis came. Here, children ran free without fear, women worked together rather than in competition, men hunted in groups and shared the meat rather than hoarding it for their own families. Here, a widow with 2 sick children had been welcomed rather than shunned, healed rather than exploited. I do not need to own land, Mary said slowly, testing the words even as she spoke them, finding them true. I never wanted ownership. I wanted safety. I wanted my children to have enough to eat and a roof over their heads, and the chance to grow up without watching me work myself to death trying to provide those things alone. If you are offering that, if you are truly saying we can stay and be part of this community, then yes, Holitopa. Yes, I accept. I accept with my whole heart. Holitopa's face broke into the first real smile Mary had seen from him, and it transformed his features, made him look younger and lighter, as if some burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Good, he said simply. That is very good. But, and here the smile faded slightly, you should know that this choice will not be easy. There are those in the village who do not trust white people, who have lost too much to ever feel safe with them again. You will face suspicion, perhaps even hostility. Some will never accept you, no matter how hard you work or how well you treat them. Can you live with that? Can you raise your children in a place where they will always be outsiders to some degree? Mary thought of Rose asking if they would be all right, of William fighting fever in his sleep, of all the places they had been rejected and abandoned by their own people. We are already outsiders everywhere we go, she said quietly. Better to be outsiders in a place where at least some people are willing to give us a chance than to be outsiders in a place where everyone wishes we would just die quietly and stop being a burden. Yes, Holitopa, I can live with suspicion and hostility, as long as there is also kindness and possibility. That is more than we have had in a very long time. Taloa, who had been listening quietly, spoke up then. I will help, she said firmly. I will teach you our language, our customs, help you understand how things work here. And I will speak for you to those who doubt, help them see that not all white people are the same, that some can learn, can change, can become part of something larger than themselves. It will not be easy, but it will be possible. Holitopa nodded his agreement. My mother also supports this. She says she saw something in your eyes when you held your son, the same thing she saw in the eyes of our own mothers on the long. Walk love stronger than death, will stronger than suffering. She says anyone who carries that kind of love deserves a place among the living, regardless of the color of their skin. Mary felt tears building again, the kind that came from being seen, truly seen, in all her brokenness and desperation and fierce protective love. Thank you, she whispered, inadequate but necessary. Thank you for seeing me as human when so many others have not. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. That is the difference between us and them, Holitopa said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. They see only categories, white and Indian, civilized and savage, worthy and unworthy. We see individuals, each carrying their own pain and hope and capacity for both harm and healing. You could have been cruel to us, could have demanded we help you without gratitude, could have looked down on us as lesser. But you did not. You came to us broken and honest, and that honesty deserves an honest response, which is yes, you may stay, yes, you are welcome, yes, we will help you build a new life even though you are different from us, because difference is not the same as wrong. The words settled over Mary like a blessing, and she felt something shift deep inside her, some fundamental reordering of how she understood the world and her place in it. She had been raised to believe certain things about civilization and savagery, about who was worthy and who was not. But everything she had experienced since Thomas died had turned those beliefs inside out, had shown her that kindness and cruelty were not determined by race or religion but by individual choice, by the daily decision to see others as human or as obstacles. A commotion near one of the dwellings interrupted the moment. A child's voice calling out, and Mary recognized it. Instantly, Rose, awake and calling for her mother with the kind of urgency that suggested fear rather than need. Mary stood quickly, her body protesting but obeying, and hurried toward the sound. She found Rose standing outside the dwelling where they had slept, her face pale and her eyes wide with confusion at waking alone in an unfamiliar place. Relief flooded the girl's features when she saw Mary, and she ran to her mother's arms with a sob of released tension. "I thought you left me." Rose gasped against Mary's shoulder. "I thought it was all a dream, and I woke up back in the desert." "And you were gone." "I am here," Mary soothed, holding her daughter tight. "I will always be here, my darling. I was just talking with Holitopa about our future, about what comes next. Do you want to hear what we discussed?" Rose pulled back, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand, and nodded. Mary led her back to the fire where Holitopa and Taloa waited, and the girl settled between them, her small frame still trembling slightly from the fear of waking alone. "Holitopa has offered us a place here," Mary said gently, watching her daughter's face. "Not as visitors or charity cases, but as members of the village, as people who belong here and contribute to the community. We would work with them, learn from them, become part of something larger than just our small family. What do you think about that, Rose? Would you like to stay here?" Rose looked around the village, at the children playing, at the women working together, at the smoke rising from cook fires and the sound of laughter mixing with industry. Her eyes lingered on Taloa, who smiled at her with genuine warmth, then moved to Holitopa, whose stern face had softened into something approaching paternal concern. "Would we have a house?" Rose asked practically. "And would William get better? And would there be other children to play with?" "And yes to all of those things," Holitopa said, speaking directly to the girl with the same respect he showed adults. "We would build you a dwelling, help your mother learn to keep it, teach all of you the skills you need to survive here. Your brother would be cared for by the best healer in the territory, my mother, who has saved many children from fever sickness. and there are many children here who would welcome a new friend, though some might be shy at first because you look different from them. I do not mind different, Rose said with the simple certainty of childhood. Mama says different is just another word for interesting. I think I would like to stay if William agrees. Can we ask him? Mary's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's consideration for her brother, at the maturity she showed even in her youth. Let us go see him together, she said. Taloa, would you take us to William? Taloa stood with a smile, gesturing for them to follow. They walked across the village to a dwelling larger than most, and as they entered, Mary smelled the strong scent of medicinal herbs, sage and cedar, and things she could not identify. William lay on a pile of soft furs, his face still pale, but no longer flushed with fever, his breathing steady and deep. Aholita sat beside him, grinding something in a stone bowl, and she looked up as they entered. The old healer spoke in Choctaw, her voice carrying warmth, and Taloa translated. She says the boy is strong, stronger than she expected. The fever has passed and will not return. He needs only rest and good food now, time for his body to remember how to be well. She says you may speak with him, but do not tire him too much. Healing requires rest as much as medicine. Mary approached carefully, kneeling beside her son, and his eyes fluttered open at her presence. Mama, he said, his voice hoarse but clear. Where are we? Are we still in the desert? No, my love, Mary said, stroking his hair with gentle fingers. We are somewhere safe now, somewhere good. A kind man found us and brought us to his village, where people have been taking care of you, making you better. Do you remember any of it? William frowned, thinking hard. I remember being hot, he said slowly, and walking, and then I do not remember anything else. It is all dark in my head. That is all right, Mary assured him. Your body was very sick, and sometimes when we are sick, we do not remember things clearly. But you are better now, and that is what matters. Rose and I are here, and we are all safe. William's eyes found his sister, who had crept closer, her face anxious. Rose, are you hurt? Did the desert hurt you? Rose shook her head quickly, kneeling beside Mary. No, I am fine. I walked beside Mama the whole time, and I was very brave, just like Papa would have wanted. And you were brave too, William. So brave. Even when you were sick, you kept trying to breathe and be strong. And now you are going to get better, and we are going to stay here, and you will like it. I think there are other children and horses and everything. William smiled weakly at his sister's enthusiasm, then his eyes moved to Mary again. Can we really stay, Mama? Or do we have to keep walking? Mary felt tears prick her eyes, but forced them back, wanting to be strong for her children in this moment. We can stay, she said firmly. If we choose to, if we are willing to work and learn and become part of this community, we can have a home here, a real home. What do you think? Should we stay? William considered this with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster, then nodded slowly. I think I would like to stop walking, he said simply. My feet hurt and I'm tired of being scared. Let us stay, Mama. Let us stay and not be scared anymore. And in that moment, looking at her children's faces, Mary knew they had found something she had not dared hope for. Not just survival, but the possibility of actually living, of building a life that held joy as well as struggle, community as well as isolation, hope as well as endurance. They had walked through fire and come out the other side, and now, against all odds, they were being offered a chance to rest, to heal, to become part of something larger than themselves. Mary looked at Holitopa, who had followed them to the dwelling and now stood in the doorway watching. And she saw in his eyes the same thing she felt in her own heart, relief that the story had not ended in tragedy, that mercy had triumphed over cruelty, that life had won over death. We will stay, she said, speaking to Holitopa, but meaning it for all of them, for her children, and for this village, and for whatever future awaited them. We will stay, and we will work, and we will learn, and we will become worthy of the gift you have given us, the gift of belonging, of home, of hope. Holitopa nodded once, a gesture of acceptance and promise, and Mary knew that the hardest part of their journey was over. even though many challenges still lay ahead. They had survived, and now they would learn to live. The first test came 3 days after Mary and her children decided to stay, when a group of men rode into the village on horses that looked like they had been ridden hard and fast, their flanks lathered with sweat and their eyes rolling white with exhaustion. The riders were white, 6 of them, dressed in the dusty clothes of frontier traders or perhaps bounty hunters, and they carried themselves with the kind of arrogance that came from never being told no. Mary was outside the dwelling she now shared with Rose and William, grinding corn under Taloa's patient instruction. When the horses thundered into the village center, the sound made her look up, and what she saw made her blood run cold. These were not men seeking trade or offering friendship. These were men looking for something, and the way their eyes scanned the village suggested they had found it. The leader, a thick-necked man with a beard stained yellow from tobacco, dismounted with deliberate slowness, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The other riders stayed mounted, forming a loose semicircle that suggested tactical thinking rather than casual arrival. Children who had been playing moments before scattered to their mothers, and women moved protectively toward their dwellings. Gathering the young ones close, Holitopa emerged from his dwelling, moving with that same unhurried grace Mary had come to recognize as his way of asserting control without aggression. 2 other men flanked him, both armed with rifles they did not raise, but kept ready. The confrontation had the feel of a dance both sides had performed before, each knowing their steps, each waiting to see who would break the pattern first. "We are looking for a woman," the leader said without preamble, his voice carrying across the village with practiced authority. "White woman traveling with 2 young children, boy and a girl. Been told she might have passed through this territory about a week back. You people seen anyone matching that description?" Mary's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. Her hands stilled on the grinding stone, and she felt Taloa's hand close around her wrist, a silent warning to stay quiet, to stay still, to let Holitopa handle this. "Many people pass through this territory," Holitopa said evenly, his English careful and measured. "Why do you seek this woman? What is your business with her?" The leader spat tobacco juice into the dirt, a gesture of contempt that needed no translation. "She owes money to a man in Arkansas, money her dead husband borrowed and never paid back. The debt passes to the widow, that is the law. We have been tracking her for 3 weeks. My employer wants his money, and we aim to collect it one way or another." Mary felt the world tilt beneath her. The debt, she had thought it settled when she sold the farm, had been told by the bank that everything was squared away, but of course that had been a lie. Or perhaps there had been other debts Thomas never told her about, secrets he took to his grave that now threatened to drag her and her children into it with him. "If she is dead," Holitopa said slowly, "then your employer's debt is also dead. Money cannot be collected from ghosts." The leader's face hardened. "That is where you are wrong, Chief. The woman has children, and children can work off their parents' debts. That is the law where we come from. So we will keep looking until we find her or those kids, and we will collect what is owed." The words hit Mary like a physical blow. They wanted to take her children, wanted to turn Rose and William into indentured servants, bound labor to pay off a debt they had not incurred. She stood without thinking, driven by a fury so pure it burned away her fear. Taloa hissed a warning, tried to pull her back, but Mary shrugged off her hand and walked toward the confrontation with her head high and her spine straight. "I am Mary Trent," she said, her voice ringing clear across the village. "The woman you seek, and I owe your employer nothing. My husband's debts were paid when I sold our farm to the bank. If your employer claims otherwise, he's either mistaken or lying, and I will not be threatened by men who chase widows across a desert for money that does not exist." The leader's eyes locked onto her with the intensity of a predator spotting prey. A slow smile spread across his face, ugly and triumphant. "Well now, that makes things simple. You will come with us back to Arkansas, where a judge can sort out the particulars. Bring the children, they are part of the collateral." "No," Mary said flatly. I will not go with you, and you will not touch my children. You have no authority here, no jurisdiction, no right to make demands. This is Choctaw land, and I am under their protection." The leader's smile vanished, replaced by a look of such malice that Mary felt her courage waver. His hand moved toward his pistol, and the other riders shifted in their saddles, hands moving to their own weapons. The village had gone silent, every eye watching, every breath held. Then Holitopa moved, stepping between Mary and the riders, with a fluidity that suggested he had been waiting for exactly this moment. His rifle was suddenly in his hands, not aimed, but ready, and the two men flanking him had their own weapons raised now, pointing at the mounted riders. "The woman speaks truth," Holitopa said, his voice carrying a hardness Mary had not heard before. "She is under our protection, and you have no authority in this village. You will leave now, and you will not return. If you attempt to take her or her children by force, you will not leave this village alive." For a long moment the tableau held. 6 armed white men, facing 3 armed Choctaw men and 1 unarmed white woman, who had somehow become the center of a conflict that could turn bloody in an instant. Mary could hear her own heartbeat, could see Rose and William watching from the doorway of their dwelling, with eyes wide and terrified. The leader's calculation was visible on his face, weighing the value of the debt against the risk of dying for it. His eyes moved from Holitopa to the other armed men, to the women and children of the village who were no longer running, but standing firm, some of them now holding their own weapons. "This is not over," the leader finally said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "My employer has connections, has friends in the territorial government. We will come back with a marshal, with papers that carry the weight of federal law. You cannot protect her forever. Then let the law come," Holitopa replied, his rifle still ready. "Now leave, before my patience runs out." The leader stared at him for a long moment more, then spat again and remounted his horse with movements jerky with frustration. The riders wheeled their horses around and thundered out of the village the way they had come, leaving a cloud of dust and threats hanging in the air. Mary's legs gave out the moment they were gone, her body finally acknowledging the terror that had kept her upright through sheer force of will. She sank to her knees in the dirt, shaking so violently her teeth chattered, and felt hands on her shoulders. Taloa and several other women gathering around her, supporting her. Holitopa lowered his rifle and turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You should have stayed hidden," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a weary acceptance. "Now they know you are here, know you are alive. They will return, and when they do, they will bring more men and the pretense of law." "I am sorry," Mary gasped between shaking breaths. "I could not let them speak of taking my children without I had to." "I know," Holitopa said. "You have the heart of a mother bear. You will fight before you will watch your cubs be taken. That is not wrong, but it is also not wise." He knelt beside her, his eyes serious. "Those men will return, probably within a week or two, and when they do, they will bring a federal marshal and papers that claim legal authority over you. I can refuse them entry to the village, but that will bring consequences for all of us. The government looks for excuses to take more of our land, to break more treaties. If we are seen as harboring fugitives, they will use it against us. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Mary understood all too well. By protecting her, the village was putting itself at risk. The weight of that knowledge settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. "Then I will go," Mary said, forcing the words out. "I will take my children and leave, go somewhere else. I will not let my presence bring harm to people who have shown me nothing but kindness." "No," a new voice said, firm and brooking no argument. Aholita approached, the old healer moving with the authority of age and wisdom. She spoke in rapid Choctaw, and Taloa translated, "She says you will not leave, that you are part of the village now, and we do not abandon our own. She says those men have no true claim on you, that debts die with the debtor under Choctaw law. She says we have defied the government before, and we will do so again, and if they come with marshals and papers, We will meet them with our own laws and treaties they signed and then ignored. Mary stared at the old woman, seeing in her lined face the history of a people who had suffered unimaginable loss and yet had not surrendered their dignity. Tears streamed down Mary's face. "I do not deserve this," she whispered. "I do not deserve your protection, your willingness to risk everything for me." Aholita spoke again, and this time Holitopa translated. "My mother says you became our people the moment we chose to save you, that there is no deserving or not deserving, only choosing to be human or choosing to be monsters. She says she has seen too many monsters in her life, and she will not stand by while more try to take more children." The words broke something in Mary, some last wall she had been holding up to protect herself from hope. She sobbed openly and felt arms around her, Taloa and other women holding her as she broke apart and began to piece herself back together. Rose and William ran to her then, their own faces wet with tears, and Mary pulled them close, the three of them clinging to each other while the village stood witness. When Mary finally had control of herself again, she looked up at Holitopa and Aholita. "I will fight," Mary said, her voice hoarse but steady. "If you will stand with me, I will stand with you. I will not run again." Holitopa nodded slowly, respect clear in his eyes. "Then we will prepare. We will send word to other villages, gather witnesses and documents, build a case that you are where you belong, and your children cannot be taken for debts that are not theirs. It will not be easy, and there is no guarantee we will win, but we will try." "Thank you," Mary said. "Thank you for not giving up on us. We do not give up on family," Aholita said through Taloa's translation. "And you are family now. That is the choice we make every day, to be the kind of people who protect rather than exploit. You are part of that choice now." And so it was decided. Not with ceremony or grand declarations, but with the simple commitment of people who had learned that survival required solidarity, that justice required courage, and that hope required the willingness to stand against those who would extinguish it. The storm was coming. Mary knew, but for the first time since Thomas died, she did not face it alone. She had found people who saw her as worth protecting, children who would grow up knowing they belonged somewhere and a purpose larger than mere survival. She had found a reason to fight, and fight she would. The days that followed moved with strange duality, peaceful on the surface while tension coiled beneath, like a snake waiting to strike. Mary threw herself into village life with determination that bordered on desperation, learning the Choctaw words for common objects and actions, mastering the technique of weaving grass into waterproof baskets, working alongside the women in gardens where corn and beans and squash grew in patterns that seemed chaotic until Taloa explained the wisdom of planting them together. Rose flourished in ways that broke Mary's heart with joy and relief. The girl had found friends among the village children, and though the language barrier created moments of confusion, laughter needed no translation. Mary would watch her daughter running through the village with the others, her face bright with happiness that had been absent for so long, and feel both gratitude and guilt that it had taken such suffering to bring them to this place. William recovered his strength slowly but steadily under Aholita's careful ministrations. The old healer had taken a particular interest in the boy, teaching him the names of healing plants and letting him help grind herbs for medicine. William followed her like a devoted shadow, his curiosity apparently boundless now that fear no longer consumed all his energy. He had begun speaking Choctaw words before Mary mastered them, his young mind absorbing the language with ease that made the adults laugh. But beneath this surface of normalcy, preparations were underway. Holitopa had sent runners to 3 neighboring Choctaw villages, calling for a council to discuss Mary's situation and the threat it represented to all of them. If the territorial government could claim authority to seize residents of Choctaw villages for debts incurred under white law, then no one was safe, native or white, from the reach of men who saw law as a tool for exploitation rather than justice. On the seventh day after the debt collectors had left, the first delegates began arriving. They came on horseback and on foot, men and women both, elders whose wisdom was written in the lines of their faces, and younger leaders whose eyes burned with the determination of those who refused to let their people be destroyed. Mary watched them gather in the village center, feeling the weight of knowing she was the cause of this disruption. This calling together of communities who had their own struggles without adding hers to the burden. The council convened at sunset, around a fire that had been built larger than usual to accommodate the crowd. Mary had been invited to attend, to tell her story in her own words, and she sat beside Taloa with Rose, and William pressed close, their small bodies warm against her sides. The firelight played across the assembled faces, creating shifting patterns of shadow and illumination that made the gathering feel both ancient and immediate. Hollytopper opened the council with words in Choctaw that flowed like water over stone, and Taloa translated in whispers for Mary's benefit. He spoke of the long walk his people had endured, of promises made and broken, of land taken and lives destroyed, but also of resilience and community, and the choice to remain human in the face of inhumanity. He spoke of finding Mary and her children dying in the desert, of the promise he had made long ago to never walk past suffering he had the power to alleviate. Then he called on Mary to speak, and she stood on trembling legs, her children clinging to her skirts. The assembled faces turned to her, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. She understood their suspicion, understood that every white person they had ever known had brought them nothing but pain and loss. She had no right to expect their protection, no claim on their mercy, except the one Hollytopper had chosen to grant. "I do not know your language well enough to speak my heart in it," Mary began, and Taloa stood beside her to translate. "So I will speak in English, and trust that my words will carry my meaning. I am Mary Trent, widow of Thomas Trent, mother of Rose and William. My husband died of cholera and left me with debts I did not know existed. I tried to reach the Oklahoma territory to claim free land, but my wagon broke and my son fell ill, and I collapsed in the desert, knowing we would die there." She paused, gathering her courage. "Hollytopper found us and saved us when he could have walked past. He brought us here, and your healer saved my son's life. You have fed us and clothed us and offered us a home when my own people abandoned us to die. I have no way to repay this kindness, except to offer my labor, my loyalty, and my promise that I will never betray the trust you have shown me." An older man spoke, his voice sharp with challenge, and Taloa translated. "He asks why we should risk government retaliation to protect one white woman and her children. He says we have suffered enough at the hands of white law without inviting more trouble." Mary nodded, acknowledging the validity of his concern. "You should not risk anything for me," she said honestly. "I'm not worth the danger my presence brings, but I would ask you to consider this. If the government can reach into your villages and take people for debts incurred under their laws, then where does it stop? Today, it is me they want. Tomorrow, it might be one of your own people who traded with a white merchant and failed to pay, or who borrowed money to buy seed, or who made any of 1,000 small transactions that could be twisted into debt and obligation. If you let them, take me without challenge. You are agreeing that their law has authority here, in your homes, over your lives." The words hung in the air, and Mary saw the shift in some faces, the recognition of truth in what she had said. Another woman spoke, younger this time, and Taloa translated. "She asks what you would do if we refuse to protect you, if we tell you to leave and face your fate alone." Mary swallowed hard, feeling Rose's grip tighten on her dress. "I would take my children and leave," she said quietly. "I would not stay where I am not wanted, would not force my presence on people who have already suffered too much. I would try to find another way, though I do not know what that way would be. But I would understand your decision and hold no bitterness toward you for it? Aholita stood then, her silver hair catching the firelight, and when she spoke, her voice carried authority that silenced the murmurs running through the crowd. Taloa's translation came swift and clear. She says Mary speaks with honest tongue, that she does not hide behind false pride or demand what she has not earned. She says the question before this council is not whether Mary deserves protection, but what kind of people we choose to be. Do we let fear of white law make us turn away from those in need? Do we become like those who turned away from us on the long walk? Or do we stand on principle, defend our sovereignty, and trust in the treaties that supposedly guarantee our right to govern ourselves within our own lands? Another elder spoke, his tone measured and thoughtful, and debate began in earnest. Mary sat back down, her legs no longer able to support her, and listened to the flow of Choctaw washing over her. Taloa continued to translate the key points, voices arguing for caution, for principle, for compromise, for defiance. The discussion went on for hours, the fire burning lower and being rebuilt, children falling asleep in their parents' laps, while the adults wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Finally, as the moon rose high and clear, Holitopa called for consensus. The process was nothing like the voting Mary had seen in white communities, no show of hands or counting of sides. Instead, each person who wished to speak did so, stating their position and their reasoning, and gradually a sense of the collective will emerge not through domination, but through patient listening and careful consideration. When at last the talking ended, Holitopa stood and spoke the decision, and even before Taloa translated, Mary could read it in the faces around her. "The council has decided," Taloa whispered. "You will stay. The village will protect you and will refuse to surrender you or your children to the debt collectors when they return. Messengers will be sent to the territorial capital to file formal protest with the federal Indian agent, citing treaty rights and tribal sovereignty. Legal scholars from the missionary school will be consulted to build a defense under both Choctaw and federal law. And if all else fails," she paused, her voice dropping lower, "the council agrees that we will not surrender you by force, that we will defend our right to determine who lives among us, even if that means confronting federal marshals with more than words." Mary's throat tightened with emotion so powerful she could not speak. She bowed her head, tears streaming down her face, while Rose and William stirred beside her. Around the fire, people began to disperse, some stopping to place a hand on Mary's shoulder in wordless solidarity, others nodding to her with respect that felt unearned but precious. Holitopa approached as the crowd thinned. "You should know what this means," he said quietly. "We have chosen a path that may lead to conflict, to government retaliation, to consequences we cannot yet see. Some here voted to protect you because they believe in the principle of sovereignty. Others because they remember being abandoned and refuse to abandon others. Some because they trust my judgment. But all of them have accepted risk for your sake, and that creates obligation. Do you understand?" "I understand," Mary said, her voice rough with emotion, "and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this gift." "Do not try to be worthy," Holitopa said, something almost like a smile crossing his stern features. "Just be human, be honest, work hard. Raise your children to understand that they belong to this community, and this community belongs to them. That is all anyone can ask." Over the next week, the village transformed from peaceful settlement to something resembling a fortress preparing for siege, though the weapons were legal documents and witness testimonies rather than rifles and arrows. Runners came and went, carrying messages to and from the territorial capital, from sympathetic lawyers and hostile officials, from other tribes facing similar encroachments and missionaries who saw opportunity to push their own agendas. Mary worked alongside everyone else, but she also began teaching. gathering the village children, including Rose and William, and offering lessons in reading and writing English. It was a small thing, a tiny contribution compared to what had been given to her, but she saw the value in it when parents watched their children write their own names for the first time, when Taloa mastered not just speaking English, but reading the legal documents that would determine their fate. And then, on the 14th day after the debt collectors had left, they returned just as promised, bringing with them a federal marshal, 2 deputies, and papers that claimed the authority of law. The confrontation everyone had been preparing for had finally arrived, and Mary stood beside Holitopa and Aholita and Taloa and all the others who had chosen to stand with her, facing men who represented power and authority, and the weight of a government that had broken every promise it ever made to the people now protecting her. The marshal was younger than Mary expected, his face still smooth, his uniform crisp and new. He read from the papers in his hand with a voice that tried for authority, but came out uncertain. "I'm here to collect Mary Trent and her children for transport back to Arkansas to face charges of debt evasion. Federal law requires that you surrender her immediately." "No," Holitopa said simply, and that single word carried more power than all the papers in the marshal's hands. The true battle was about to begin. The marshal shifted uncomfortably under the weight of dozens of eyes watching him, his hand hovering near his sidearm but not touching it, as if he understood that drawing a weapon here would end poorly for everyone. Behind him, the 2 deputies looked even more uncertain, their faces pale beneath their hats. Clearly unprepared for facing an entire village united in refusal, Taloa stepped forward, carrying a bundle of papers that had arrived from the territorial capital just 2 days prior. She spoke in English, clear and confident. "Marshal, we have here documents from the federal Indian agent acknowledging that this village exists under treaty protection as sovereign Choctaw territory. We have copies of the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, which guarantees our right to govern ourselves in matters of internal residence and law. And we have witness statements from 3 legal scholars stating that debt collection laws do not supersede treaty rights." The marshal took the papers she offered, his young face creasing with confusion as he scanned the dense legal language. As he read, his expression shifted from certainty to doubt, his eyes widening at something he found on the second page. "This cannot be right," he muttered, then looked up at Mary with an expression that was no longer hostile, but bewildered. "According to this affidavit from the Arkansas Territorial Courthouse, the debt your employer claims was paid in full 18 months ago by sale of property. The creditor is a man named Silas Worthington, and according to court records, he has been filing false debt claims against widows across 3 territories. Collecting money for debts that do not exist." Mary's breath caught in her throat. "What?" The marshal's jaw tightened with anger, but it was no longer directed at her. "It appears you are not a fugitive, Mrs. Trent. You are a victim of fraud. This man Worthington has been running a scheme, tracking down widows whose husbands died with any recorded debts, then fabricating documents claiming the debts were never paid, sending collectors to intimidate the women into paying twice or surrendering their children as labor." He pulled another paper from his jacket, this one bearing an official seal. "I also have here a warrant for Worthington's arrest, issued 3 days ago. Those men who came here before me, they were not legitimate collectors. They were criminals working for a criminal. Mrs. Trent, on behalf of the territorial government, I apologize for the distress this has caused you and your family." Mary felt her legs give out, but this time from relief so overwhelming it stripped away all her strength. Holitopa caught her, steadying her as tears streamed down her face. Rose and William clung to her, not understanding the legal details, but sensing that something fundamental had shifted. The marshal approached carefully, holding out the warrant and the court documents. "These are yours to keep. They prove your debt was satisfied and that you owe nothing to anyone. You are free, Mrs. Trent, completely free. Mary took the papers with shaking hands, staring at the official seals and signatures that represented not just her freedom, but her children's future. "I do not understand," she whispered. "How did you discover this?" "A lawyer in the territorial capital has been investigating Worthington for months," the marshal explained. "When I filed the request to pursue you into Choctaw territory, it triggered a review of the case. The lawyer saw the patterns, connected your situation to a dozen others, and the whole scheme unraveled. Worthington is in custody now, and every widow he defrauded is being notified." He looked around at the assembled village, respect evident in his young face. "I came here expecting to enforce an unjust law. Instead, I find people defending what was right all along. You have my apologies and my admiration." Holitopa nodded slowly, accepting the words. "Justice came today because people chose to stand rather than bend, because a community refused to surrender one of their own. That is a lesson worth remembering, Marshal, for all the cases you will face in your career." "I will remember," the marshal said quietly. He tipped his hat to Mary, then to Holitopa and Aholita. "Good day to you all. May you live in peace." The marshal and his deputies mounted their horses and rode away, but this time they left behind not threats, but vindication, not fear, but freedom. As the dust settled, the village erupted in celebration, voices rising in songs of joy, children running and laughing, women embracing Mary as tears flowed freely. Mary sank to her knees, pulling Rose and William close, sobbing with a relief so profound it felt like being reborn. "We are free," she whispered into their hair. "Truly free. No one can take you from me. No one can claim you. We are safe." Rose looked up at her mother with eyes shining. "Does this mean we can stay forever? That this is really our home?" Yes," Mary said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, my darling. We are home, and nothing will take that away from us." Holitopa knelt beside them, his stern face softened by something that looked like peace. "You walked through fire to get here," he said. "You trusted when you had every reason to fear. You stood when you could have run. And now you are not just safe. You are free and you are family." Aholita approached, placing her weathered hands on Mary's head in blessing, speaking words in Choctaw that needed no translation because the love in them was universal. Taloa stood beside them, tears on her own cheeks, translating anyway. "She says you came to us broken, and we have watched you become whole. She says your children will grow strong here, will learn both your ways and ours, will build bridges between worlds. She says this is how healing happens, not through forgetting pain, but through choosing love despite it." Mary looked around at the faces surrounding her, at the village that had become her salvation and her home, at the people who had risked everything to protect strangers simply because it was right. She thought about the long walk through the desert, the moment her arms gave out, the certainty that death had found them, and how impossible it would have seemed then that she would end up here, surrounded by love and belonging and freedom. "Thank you," she said, looking at each face, storing this moment in her heart forever. "Thank you for carrying us when we could not walk. Thank you for fighting when we had no strength left. Thank you for showing us what family truly means." And as the celebration continued around them, as children played and women sang and men spoke of the future with hope rather than fear, Mary understood that she had found something more valuable than land or wealth or security. She had found a community that chose compassion over cruelty, that valued humanity over law, that understood that the measure of a people was not in what they took, but in what they gave. They had walked through darkness and found light, had faced death and chosen life, had been broken and made whole again through the simple courage of people who refused to look away from suffering. This was home not because of walls or ownership, but because of belonging, because of love, because of the unshakable knowledge that they would never walk alone again. And that was the greatest freedom of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.